If you want to increase your success and improve the rate of your success, I'd work on emotional intelligence. That is one of the differentiators in terms of people getting through life. And whether it's a leadership role or just as a person starting out in a new career, and emotional intelligence is a level of awareness about what's going on internally and how you can observe emotions in the environment and how you regulate your own emotions relative to that. There's a level of interaction and aptitude that people are looking for, because there's a lot of people out there that can do a lot of the stuff we can do. We have people that can score goals on the rink, right? But if they don't play well with their teammates, if there's conflict, those days have passed where we're just going to have the one star. Now we're looking at that team. We're looking at how well they play together, how they look out for each other, how they bring people up and are generous, right?
Welcome to Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD, your weekly inspiration for post-PhD career development. With me, David Mendes. Today, I have the great pleasure of having with me Dr. Rob Leon. Rob is a professor of human resource development at Idaho State University. He specializes in culture, leadership development, strategy, and organizational performance. In addition to his teaching and research, Rob and his wife, Angie Leon, own Black River Performance Management, that you can find at blackriverpm.com. With over 20 years in leadership and organizational development, he is recognized as a visionary leader who promotes sustainable, actionable, science-backed solutions for individuals and for organizations. Rob is a dynamic speaker and consultant who understands how to integrate the theory and teachings of best practices into organizational practices, resulting in strategic and sustainable improvement solutions. As a professor and researcher specializing in the psychological and behavioral sciences, Rob provides expert guidance to clients, addressing their people needs, obstacles, and opportunities. His work aims to demystify the process of leading others. Rob Leon, thank you so much for taking the time of being here with me today. It's a pleasure to have you on Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD.
Wonderful. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So, Rob, your mission in life and in research was kind of very quickly shared with the audience in your intro. But it's always interesting especially to the young researchers out there who might still be in graduate school and listening, to hear about the journey, the professional journey of the guests on the show. So, can you talk a little bit about how you found this interest for this domain of psychological and behavioral sciences, to dealing with culture, leadership development, and how you decided to actually go and get a graduate degree on it. And then we can talk about what it's all about, how it applies to organizations, but also to the listener who is now kind of hopping onto this conversation.
Perfect. Yeah. So the journey was, I'll go through it kind of quick. After my first run at grad school, I went into leadership and management positions. And so I had a master's at that point that had a little bit of content in leadership. And so I found myself in the leadership and supervisory roles and working with teams to build capacity. And over time, as we continue to work through these teams and the purpose, and we had about 250 people on staff, I had about 12 direct reports, I spent a lot of time training people. And I started to lose, part of it was I started to lose some of my interest in training because I felt that the focus on the training was misaligned with what actually the people needed, right? It wasn't until later when I got into my doctoral program that I really began to understand that training is a great knowledge transfer tool, but in many instances, that's not what we need in organizations. And so I knew there was more out there. I just didn't know what that was until I started in a doctoral program. And my program focused on organizational performance. And so what I started to do is learn about investigations, diagnoses and analysis, root cause, things like that, to determine what are these contributing factors that are leading to these performance deficiencies. And then went into what are the solutions for these things that are based on this really systematic, regimented, rigorous process of learning and uncovering these things to building the solutions that will address those things. And so I went through that program and I spent a number of years really focusing on the intervention side of things and the solution side of things. And what occurred to me after working with some different groups, and at that point I had started teaching in a graduate psychology program focusing on organizational performance. So really focusing on that intervention approach. But once I started consulting in that space more, I learned that there was a lack of stickiness to these solutions, that they weren't actually adequately, well, no, it wasn't that they weren't adequately addressing the issue. The adoption rate was low by the organization. So the solution was identified. It was a good solution. But what I realized is that I didn't have enough of a handle on some of that psychological aspect of why people do what they do to integrate those solutions. Because most organizations want the solution identified, at least at that time when I was working with them, and then they wanted to just run with it themselves and build it out and integrate it. And so it just consistently didn't work. And so I started to spend more time in the behavioral sciences realm, and I moved my research line into the motivational sciences area. And that's when I started to understand the problem for the human, not for the system, and what it takes to influence human behavior to adopt and adapt these solutions so that they would work, so that essentially, using that language, they become more sticky. What ended up happening as I made that transition, I was able to better support those clients with not only seeing what the solution is based off of the inputs, but also based off of their people, what those items are that we need to consider as variables that are going to get in the way. And so the focus actually started to move from solution to much earlier in the process into integration, even to the point when we're posting and screening candidates and having those initial conversations, we're starting to calibrate their interest to guess what our norms are of the organization. And so what happened from that is went from early in career, and I think you could appreciate this when you're a doctoral student, you learn a lot, but it's very deep in a very limited area. Sometimes it's difficult to think about the thesis process, right? It's one of the biggest challenges going through that thesis process is being able to articulate what it is exactly that you're going to study, right? We know it here and we know it here. And if people can't see this, I'm pointing at my head and my heart. And we're really challenged to articulate what it is we're going to study and why it is. And so I think that becomes a big challenge for people entering non-academic careers right off the bat. But then I grew into it more and more and became a little bit more effective in integration. So now when we're working with organizations, we've moved out of this consultant to more of a partnership framework. We're usually with them for a number of years. We help them with whatever they need as it relates to the people aspects, whether that is hiring strategy, onboarding strategy, exit strategies, specific and isolated performance improvement initiatives, whatever those things are. But that's kind of where I started and where I'm at right now.
Yeah. Super interesting. So you really went from, okay, there's this problem that we detect at a certain stage of a team's evolution. Let's try to patch it, to, no, actually, now I understand this is a culture issue. So we need to work the culture from scratch. And then these things are taken care of kind of organically. That's how I understood.
Absolutely. Increase the adoption rate, right? Because we're actually the factors that contribute to that adoption.
So this is really interesting to me because culture, leadership development, organizational performance, or just performance are terms that are, we hear about in graduate school, but often we hear about when we're starting to take, let's say, career-related training, right? And it's easy to kind of think of those terms as it's something a little bit foreign, that is, a company, for example, let's say Google, the message of what their culture is out there a lot in the media, but it feels like this is someone in a big company through time creates a culture, but then a culture is something that is kind of pruned and maintained, but it kind of belongs to the identity of a company. So it's kind of separated from the human factor. It's kind of a very hazy thing that kind of defines a company's personality or persona, let's say. And then leadership also, there's kind of connotations to it, right? Oh, someone in suit and tie, C-suite, leadership. There's a lot of preconceived ideas related to these terms that I'd love for us to kind of demystify, like you said, because we were talking, of course, before the interview, but I think a lot of them, or all of these that I said, also apply to you personally in your professional journey. And, given that you see students, well, you've been through graduate school yourself, you probably have these types of conversations with students who study under you. I'd love us to try to make these bridges between these concepts that have maybe a very particular place in people's minds and make them more applicable to themselves. Can you find a way to start building that image?
Well, let's start at something very simple and basic in the sense of we only know what we know, right? And so as you explain this, it really resonates with me that this is the space I live in. And to take anyone, like any doctoral graduate, whether it's biochemistry or forensic science, what's the extent to their understanding and interaction with the terms and the concepts of culture and leadership in and of itself, right? It's so it's just, for many people, a lot of the stuff we talk about is just words until we start to educate them on that, right? And as we learn, and as you probably recall, a lot of our learnings in the classroom or the lab are really informed by the experiences we've had by those instructors. And they actually have a really strong influence over how we then teach and train others, good or bad, right? And so we really are kind of limited to our experiences and the lenses we wear and how we see the world. And as it relates to culture, we think oftentimes, I think generally the greater populace thinks of culture in terms of cultural identity, heritage, things like that. Those are aspects that I think would probably are more common around the masses. But now what we're looking at are, what are those unique pieces, those inputs, those customs, those practices that you might do in your own home, I was raised up in Canada. I was in an Italian family, and we had certain customs, and we did church in a certain way and all these things, and that informed our culture. But in the workplace, it might not be any of those things, but it's some other things that are prevalent as it relates to interactions, prioritizing things such as values. Maybe in your family, you never talked about values, and they're inherent, but in the organization, because we're bringing such a diverse group of people together, and we want to get them on the same page, we start talking about values and start talking about priorities, principles, things like that, and really moving to help people understand that they are a part of a unit much larger than themselves, and we all need to coexist. At the end of the day, we go home and we go into our apartment or our house or whatever our dwelling is, and we have our own culture there. But when we're at work, we might have our own office, but we're a part of a larger milieu, a culture, identity of a group that has rules, both written and unwritten, spoken and unspoken. And we are a part of that. And that can get us into some trouble at times, or it can help us move through it in a nice way because we fit nicely. But young professionals, baby dogs, stuff like that. And if you've spent most of your career in a classroom or a lab, there's a lot of learning experience once you finally get out there on the floor of the professional lab or with the consulting team, and that's the direction you're headed. And so there has to be a level of openness to what it is that's going to happen outside of where our expertise are. It's really important for me that we really acknowledge that we have limits to our expertise, and that just because I might have an advanced degree in one area, it doesn't mean I'm all knowing and all ready and ready to be a leader. And I'll even give you an example, right? This concept of shared governance that we experience in academics. I find it interesting that when I'm sitting with my colleagues, my program is an interdisciplinary program, but it's housed in the College of Education as opposed to the College of Business. And when we talk about the future of the organization and its identity and hiring, I find it very interesting that people that are, kindergarten to grade 3 specialists are, I'm not saying that they shouldn't have a say in an opinion, but I'll just put it this way. I will never propose to a teacher at that level how to teach children at that level because it's outside of my wheelhouse. And unfortunately, sometimes that doesn't happen because people think that they've reached a certain level that they're knowing and knowledgeable, right? Whereas we study and focus on organizational success. And so I think we're a little closer to what's really at stake here, as well as what are the solutions and opportunities for us. So I just share that because there's a level of humility that can really derail a young academic when whether they go into industry or stay in higher ed, that, there's this realization, or we have to have this realization that I'm still learning. Like, I might have been top of my class, but I'm now small fish in a big pond, and a little humility there.
I really love that you mentioned that, Rob, because this has been mentioned to me by hiring managers or people who are on the other side trying to hire PhDs. Lack of humility is a big no-no for them and is a big obstacle to you getting that first job. And there's reason for it, of course, which is, okay, I've studied all these years, maybe away from my country or even my continent of origin to get this super advanced degree. And so I see myself as someone who, like you said, is an expert at something, but, I am now part of the, 2, 3, 5% of people who have this degree. So I deserve some things, some status, some money, salary, etc., etc. And I'd really love to latch on to the word humility that you just mentioned, and I'm so happy you mentioned it, to maybe look at it from different angles, because it's a word that also has some connotations, right? And part of it can be a connotation of lower grade, humility, lower hierarchy, or humility, weakness. And you also said something else just before, which is, and I think they both connect. Humility, in the way we're talking about it, is openness to keep learning. It's not saying you're on a lower rung or whatever. It's just, okay, I'm changing cultures because that's the context we're in. So there's stuff I need to learn. There's a new language. There's a new law, rules of engagement in whatever conversation, etc. Can you please share some of your reflections on that based on your research, but also your experience? Because it's so important.
Yeah, a couple of thoughts that come to mind. The first thing that comes to mind is something that we talk to our students as well as our clients on. And my wife really nails this when she's talking with clients. So she used to prepare people for the operating room. And so they had very high credentials and qualifications for her students so that they're ready to move into the operating room, right? So they passed all their tests and boards and all those things. They had the technical expertise. They had the knowledge they needed. But why did these people end up getting fired? Because of their behaviors, right? Because of a low level of maybe organizational citizenship behaviors. So what we mean by that is how well people play together in the workplace, right? Those attitudinal things. And so those are something to really remember. It doesn't matter how sharp we are if we're not going to play well with the people that we're on this team with. And some organizations have some tolerance for that and a culture of tolerance for that. But by far and large, most aren't. Most are looking for people that are going to play well together, actually going to be kind, respectful, because we know that affects people's interest and ability to show up the next day. We know it has relationships on their intrinsic levels of motivation, right? And so those are the things we want to focus on, is helping people understand those bits as it relates to being successful in any job at any phase of our career.
Mm-hmm. And I love that. So you use the term organizational citizenship, which is a totally new term for me. Anyway, I'm going to keep it because I think it's interesting to explore on my time. But yeah, so being a team player. And I remember one of the early interviews of the show with someone who did her master's, but then decided, there's some people, and you probably know some, who go to graduate school but have many different interests. And so after her master's, she actually studied woodworking, but more specialized, like in building furniture. And then she went back and she went to use her knowledge from the master's in industry. And she said how it was important, how actually her best colleagues were people who didn't study until graduate school, but had years of experience in a specific domain. And she said, I had so much to learn from them. If I had gone into this relationship saying, oh, I have a degree, I am whatever, more important than you, she wouldn't have advanced as much as she did. She wouldn't have learned as much as she did. So I think it really talks to what you just said. And I think that's it. The important thing is that if you don't go to that path of humility, and like you said, some organizations have some tolerance for some of that, but you're missing opportunities to grow personally, professionally, because what happens also in the stories that I've been sharing is that you exercise that humility at the beginning, but then we are these, I'm talking about PhDs, masters, etc. We learn fast and we learn deep. Mm-hmm. So once we get in the door, we can prove ourselves quickly, and then it'll take another trajectory to our career. Is this something you've observed, or do you have any comment on this?
Yeah. So, we know that it is common practice to advance people that have reached a certain peak in their craft, right? Their expertise. And now let's say, David, you've done good work. We have some patents now. We like what you're doing. You're sticking around. You like it here. Let's move you into a leadership role, right? And so now here's our first piece of the conversation, right? So what makes David qualified to be a leader, right? So you think about all the prep we go through in whatever our field and craft is, whether it stops at an associate's or it goes all the way to postdoc or whatever, we get the certification or this qualification. But then as the sophistication of the organization increases, and we're talking about leadership, now all of a sudden we don't measure or look for expertise in those areas, right? And so that is an important factor, in my opinion, as we work through these experiences, because I think a lot of people do want to move up in many instances. There's data that suggests something else that's happening too. And we don't need to discuss that right now, I don't think. But people have this desire to teach and train others, to lead, right? Like I've learned something, so I'm willing and interested to help others to move down this road, especially if I'm going after product knowledge expert, to be able to be a lead and bring a team together and kind of share some of my expertise and bring them along. But what we also know too is that if we look at especially certain lines of inquiry or certain areas in academia, the pace of which things are changing in those areas of specialization, that as we're promoting up, we might not be staying as relevant or current as we needed to in our former position, which doesn't mean we don't move on, because we've built other things. We built organizational, cultural understanding. We know how to utilize networks and how to resource certain things so that we take this idea or this concept and move it into production, right? And then eventually move it into the market, things like that. So it's a natural process we go through. But let's be honest, if you can't play well with others in the sandbox, that might be a short-lived opportunity. And so that brings us back to what we do in terms of those cultural pieces, those leadership acumen pieces. What are these things that we now need to know, even though we've felt like we've arrived in terms of our credentials? What do we need to know now to move on and to do what it is that we want to do in the next phase of our career?
Yeah. No, it's super interesting. Now, leadership is one of those words that some people may react to strongly at different strengths, especially people who are introverted. Do you have, with all the work you've done, I think naturally people who are more introverted will maybe even self-exclude themselves of thinking, I'm not made for a leadership position. I'm pretty sure you can disprove this, but thinking of, let's say, a graduate student who is in the middle of their PhD or to the second, third, to the end of the PhD, what can I do to prepare myself for my transition after the PhD? And someone tells them, some companies like that you have some leadership examples in your CV and during their interview. And I'd really like to see if we could, again, make a parallel between how, before being in an organization, like a private company or even, government or whatever, how can you, as a solo young researcher, develop this thing called leadership and take actions that then you can tell stories of leadership when you start applying for jobs? Because that's another disconnect that exists, is people think, I don't think I have that type of experience. And I'm sure you have examples of good practices of how to actually do it independently of being an extrovert or an introvert, because that's another question that I get a lot.
Yeah, so let's start with the introvert and extrovert piece. I'm a really high-level introvert. But
Me too.
actually, if we look at the typography of many academics, there's a lot of similarities there. But that doesn't mean that we can't develop the skills to do what it is that we need to do. You've done it in the lab. What makes you think you can't do it with other people, right? So sometimes we just have to, and this is where I think mentorship really can help people that are in that. And this is where good academic mentors come in and really help them understand the world they're about to enter, especially if they have private industry experience or investments or IP, things like that. And this is where academics that don't have that perspective can actually underserve those students. And that's why it's really important to start to understand what our trajectories are as we go through that journey to determine who will be our best advisors. To some extent, it's what's the advisor studying, and I want to study under them. But at the same time, I think if we could help broaden people's understanding that, when you're done here, you have the option of academia, or you have industry options too. How do we integrate this? And I think that's a real important strategic avenue for institutions to really consider. So part of it is as simple as starting to work well together, right? So you can take every university, every college has a variety of different organizational structures and groups. And when I say that, I'm not talking about departments versus colleges and schools. I'm talking about, that woman you talked about woodworking. Lots of schools have woodworking clubs, right? People need hobbies. And that's one of the reasons students go to certain schools, especially at the undergraduate levels, because of the types of clubs and opportunities for socialization, right? So even within your group, some of our more advanced study programs might have national level or international level competitions, right? Becoming involved with those, working well with others that are in the class or across the college. One of the things I love are some of these competitions and initiatives that are cross colleges. So you get engineering students with pharmaceutical students, and they go out and they do some great things. But even participating in that speaks to a willingness and an interest to get outside their comfort zone. Then let's take that a little further. Well, you did that year 1, year 2. You want to become a little bit more involved, and you've had some good experiences. You might be a little nervous because it's outside of your wheelhouse, but we've learned everything in our life, actively and passively. So we can learn how to maybe be the treasurer of the group or to be the vice president and watch what happens so that you could prepare up one day to be the president of that group or to be the group lead, whatever that might be. And those are the places, in my opinion, that we have some really low-hanging fruit in higher education. I think higher education is such a gift for people for a variety of different ways, but especially kind of a petri dish for experimentation, taking risks that you're somewhat insulated and protected. You can make bad decisions and you pay the price. You also learn your message in a very student-focused, student development perspective. And so I'd say look around at what you can do. And, if there's 4 of you that are hired in the lab and you're talking to the advisor, the faculty lead for the lab, and you've been there for a couple of years and you want to get more experience, ask for that. Hey, would you mind if I kind of took some lead and maybe ran a couple of our meetings or was responsible for maybe taking something off your plate and starting to organize all the GAs together so that we have a plan that we self-manage, or at least I could have because that's a great little promotion area that really can help position them. And then all of these things are relevant on your CV, right? People that are hiring, if you are doing the natural progression from where you're graduating to really where that next level, entry level opportunity is, if you're not jumping ahead and say, hey, I need to be chief of lab or something like that. If I'm just going to that next natural progression, they know that you've lived in a lab or you've lived with your nose in a book for 5 to 10 years, that your leadership opportunities might be shift lead at McDonald's when you were an undergrad and then, head of the math club in college and then eventually, leading a group at an international stats competition or something like that, right? Like these are all like training wheels for us. Like you and me both weren't born this way. We developed into this and we earned our lumps, right? And we have stories to tell. But we got to where we are because we took some risks. And those risks can be small and calculated, and they don't need to be drastic. And we just acknowledge them for what they are, and then we move on to the next one. If there's anything I could leave as we talk about this, is increasing our sense of self-awareness, right? Understanding who we are, especially as young professionals, better in terms of, how's my communication style? How am I coming across? What's my level of emotional regulation or emotional intelligence? Am I negatively affecting people because I'm up and down, like all these things that the more we can learn about who we are and almost watch ourselves go through this journey and evaluate those steps, the stronger we'll become, the better we'll become. We will be able to navigate the space better to determine what that next appropriate opportunity for us to take. And we have to have some setbacks. We need to face some obstacles so that we grow through those setbacks.
Hi there. If you have questions and doubts about your professional future as a young scientist, as a PhD, you can now talk directly to me by joining the Beyond the Thesis community on school.com. If you go to skool.com/papaphd, you will find a safe space and a community of people like you figuring out their postgraduate school career journey. And you will have ample opportunity to talk with me directly and ask me your questions on live coffee time sessions and on weekly Q&As. Additionally, you will find courses and also have the opportunity of having one-on-one calls with me. So remember, skool.com/papaphd. See you soon. You said something that really resonates with me, and it is, first, university is a petri dish. It's kind of a privileged environment to test these things because there's all this infrastructure that's there, that if you have a project, you can approach someone to say, can we start this seminar series or these alumni? You can do these things because you're in university. So to you who are listening, now is the moment to try these things, because once you've graduated, it's over. That you're out of the petri dish at that time. But one thing you were saying had to do with learning about yourself. And I think there's no better way, unless you have really great powers of introspection, there's no better way than in interaction with others. And so taking part, like you said, in organizing, a math championship earlier on, or like I was saying now, an alumni seminar where, every semester we bring an alumnus and talk about where they are in their career, etc. All these things, not only you can document them and then put them in your CV, but you're meeting different people, hearing them, especially if they're coming from outside, hearing their culture, the language, the terminology they bring with them, but you're also developing and kind of having the soundboard of the people who you're interacting with that kind of tells you these things about yourself of what's my communication style. Once you have to organize an event with this many people, you'll know what your communication style is just in the natural, organic way of communicating with the people. I really, really think it makes sense. And I also loved the fact that you mentioned that this could start, if you really need to stay close to your test tubes, you can do it just in the lab. What next responsibility can I take on in the lab? And this is something I had never, no one had ever told it to me like that. And I think it's really interesting because it's really low risk in a certain way.
Absolutely. I also think about, so I was an assistant dean in a college of business for many years, and faculty were busy doing their things, but we had students that wanted co-curricular, extracurricular experiences. We had funds to support that, but we did without anyone asking. We didn't know that there was an appetite for it, right? So maybe the faculty wasn't interested in it because they're too busy doing whatever it is they were doing. But there's opportunity, just to your point. Let's bring in a speaker series. Anyone ever think of a speaker series? We'll bring data scientists and maybe they'll zoom in once a month and that are our alums. And maybe once a year, we'll have someone, a scientist in residence for a couple of days. Do we have funds for that? And deans and department heads are not necessarily as in touch with some of those funding pieces because they don't get a lot of money at times, but deans love throwing money at those things. Those are things that they build their vitas on to move on to the next opportunity. So there's a lot of opportunity in the system, to your point, to do a bunch of this stuff.
Amazing. Well, take notes, you who are listening. Go talk to your dean if you have an idea.
Yeah.
And if you don't have an idea, get with your colleagues and find one.
And David, if I can mention this one next thing, is that you go talk to the dean and they're like, well, we have funds, but I'm not sure. Like sometimes you have to learn how to manage other people, right? You have to put the right information and ask the right questions. You have to be curious when you go into those interactions. And they might be like, well, I'm not sure if we could pull this off. And you could just ask, is there someone I can work with outside of this dean suite that can help me? In some other instances, I know where I worked directly with the foundation who was fundraising for the college. And because they found out someone was interested in this, they started pulling funds from donors and from alumni to create these things. Like we created great programs for the students because of that. But if no one's asking, sometimes we just don't know what we don't know, both even as administrators and faculty, but as well as students.
That's amazing. And I think we just kind of made a super cool example of what leadership can look like in graduate school as you're, working towards your degree. And we took it all the way to talking with the stakeholders and trying to see who you partner with. It's amazing. And that's a great story to tell in an interview.
Can I add one more piece as it relates to that too? Because
sure.
You're talking about interview now, right? And if you've lived in this little cohort of your academic study with these people, and you might not have interacted with maybe an internship or practicum where you're getting exposed, don't forget your university has career services centers. They have interviewing services, right? They have CV development services. You can get outside of your group to seek out these services that you've paid for, right? Tuition's covered it, essentially.
That's it.
And they can help you prep for those, interesting and difficult conversations you might encounter.
It's true. And again, same thing. I'm always droning this, but I'll say it again. The day you graduate, it's over. You're going to have to pay for those types of services.
Yes, exactly. And they're not cheap.
No, and they're not cheap. So thank you. Thanks a lot for mentioning that. And because it's funny because I was having another conversation earlier today, and especially graduate students, often they'll dive into their project, keep their nose down, and then raise their heads like 1 year before finishing because they need to prepare and think of writing, etc. And they will have skipped all these things they are entitled to and they have paid with their tuition just because of lack of information.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful that you mentioned it because I don't know what's the way to do it, but cohort after cohort, there's this kind of resistance to the information getting to everyone.
Yeah.
And I think it's a big missed opportunity because these people they're trained for that. It's kind of a shortcut for you to learn these things because they know exactly, if you talk with them a little bit, they'll know how to evaluate you, what resources to give you, or what people or resources to point you towards. So yeah, don't underestimate how this can help you.
Yes.
Sure. Now, we've talked leadership, we've talked culture. One of the things, and this will be kind of going to the end of the interview, one of the things that I hear again a lot, which is kind of a critique of, and I felt it when I came out of the PhD, but a critique of people straight out of graduate school is language, communication, but in terms of how you present yourself, maybe advocate for yourself, but also how you talk about what you did.
Mm-hmm.
We learn, and this, we learn to talk about, and you also mentioned it before, to talk about our data in a certain way that's very geared towards talking to colleagues, to maybe, I know if you're in an interdisciplinary project, then you'll have to popularize a little more, but it's a very kind of square format that often doesn't fit well with talking with someone who's in a hiring committee for a company, for example. I imagine you do some work on that with people, probably also with organizations because they are the ones who needs to get good candidates. But being that you're part of the community, what would be, in your sense, usual errors, mistakes? And I'm saying mistakes, but because they come from a culture, it's not so much a mistake as a
it's jargon, right?
Preparation.
To some extent, it's unique to that domain.
Exactly. So how do you bridge that gap? Don't go through those first very grueling, unsuccessful interviews.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, one of the things I did, I mentioned before we jumped on that today's the last day of our exam week for the semester. And one of the final week's assignments was a reflection in my performance class of walking two people through your project and soliciting their feedback on how you presented and articulated it so that you can determine if you're being clear enough with your language and your presentation, right? That outside perspectives are important. They're not going to know necessarily methodology and the appropriateness of certain things that your colleagues in your, whether it's your lab or your class, would know. But to your point, you might be on a hiring team with a marketing person, a data scientist, and then another person that's just maybe general management that doesn't have the background. And you need to do this in a way that helps present that information. That's tough. There's a natural evolution of that, but the more we talk about it with people that are not a part of these systems, the better we're going to be. And so once again, going back to those resources that are available in the institution, go ahead and utilize those because those people have no clue what you're talking about, right? Like you go to career services, they might have a degree in psychology or they might have a degree in art or whatever. It will be able to be a good mirror to you. But the thing I would ask them to do is help them understand why you're there. Tell them that, look, I have an interview with Pfizer. It's an entry level chemical research scientist position, right? And I'm concerned that the people that are going to be interviewing me might not have the technical expertise that I have. Can you be the interview person and ask me some questions and ask me to talk about my experiences in a way that it lands and connects so that you at least know how I spent my time, what I did, right? That's one of those things that's really hard to kind of work through outside of someone else. But you could also talk about technology and, get on and chat GPT yourself there and say, let's have a conversation for the layperson in terms of what I'm doing and give me some feedback and help me understand. I'm not saying write your resume or write your cover letter because they all look the same when that happens. But we're using the tools to help us understand how might I connect better with someone that's more introverted? What are some tips to connect with someone that, that might not be familiar with our craft or our field or our industry, things like that.
Yeah.
That's a tough question. That really is, because it really calls on other people. To me, the better solution is what's the nature of a mentor? And that could be an academic mentor, which sometimes, us professors have too much expert knowledge. So we're not good teachers. Like as much as we're in a teaching environment, we're not good teachers in some instances because we might be too expert. Our expertise might be too specific, the wrong type of language. But finding people in industry that relate to what we're doing. Like all of us have alumni networks. We might not know that. Many of the listeners might not know that. But these people are eager to help. I have one of the last universities I worked for, and one of the guys he owns several patents in the auto racing industry. That's what my son wants to do. My son wants to get into that. My son's 17. He wants to get into marketing and stuff in auto industries. So I reach out, Kurt, can you help Ian? Do these things. And people are so eager to help each other, right? And so utilize those services, like you said, that are baked in and say, hey, who's on our alumni board? Can I access any of our alumni? And a lot of these people are willing to have these conversations. And in fact, when I was at one of my former schools, I created a mentorship program, right? And we paired any student that wanted a mentor with a mentor around the world that was affiliated with our university. And the nice thing about that is, if this isn't really recognized by people, they open up the doors for jobs. that
Exactly.
they open up doors within their company, or if they can't hire at that point, they turn to their golf buddy and say, hey, I got someone really sharp. You're looking for someone. Come check out Craig, right? Stuff like that. So once again, the university has these resources that we just need to learn how to navigate and get in front of and asking questions. And unfortunately, sometimes our divisions and even our subject matter areas are so narrow and small, right? You might be coming in with a group of 6 and it's a small group, but there's this huge, that's 6 people in 14,000 in the university, right? And there's a whole robust system out there to help people with that stuff.
And yeah, there's nothing like exchanging with a human and mentorship for sure. If you can be mentored, there's nothing better, I'd say, because someone who's going to champion you, who's going to cheer you, and also share that knowledge with you. And part of the knowledge could be this lingo, this culture-specific jargon that you're missing when you're just fresh out of graduate school. Rob, we're getting to the end of the interview, and I have kind of a last question for you. Do you have something based on all our other conversations that you'd still want to talk and that we didn't touch upon?
If I could just add this little perspective, and this is what you and I talked about in our last conversation, is how do we get outside of academia and into some of these more IP or industry-specific things? And there's a lot of space in every higher ed institution. Every higher ed institution that has a doctoral program in has initiatives that relate to economic development, intellectual property, patents, things like that. And
technology transfer.
Yeah, tech transfer, all that stuff. And if that's something you're curious in, but you don't hear it in your small unit, because sometimes we're just so far removed, it's out there. You can find it. And if you want to, some people just want to go down the path and be an academic in the end. That's awesome. Good for them. But some people are going through things that they want to bring to market to, address food insecurities for certain countries and a variety of different things. The systems, we have these systems to help you find those people, to get connected, to learn. Like, that's why I'm an entrepreneur now. And I've had probably about 5 or 6 different startups, is that I actually came through as a service load component, economic development. And I learned through the university's initiatives and the greater community's initiatives that there are mechanisms, because I came from a family, we didn't talk about business. There was no reason why I'd be owning businesses now based on my upbringing. So I had to seek it out myself. But it's all within the university, all these different things. There's incubators, there's thought leadership seminars, there's all sorts of things. So I just wanted to add that because I thought that was something that was really important that we had discussed in the past.
It's true. And I see and I meet young people who are in their PhDs, are inspired to do something more, even like more entrepreneurial, and they have a great time communicating and using the tools that these departments have, and often it's like an innovation department or knowledge transfer department. And then, I see the stars in their eyes of, okay, I'm actually making this project real, and I'm having support, professional support from my university. And I can have impact, and the impact that I want. And like you said, it could be on a patient community for a disease, or it could be something ecological, or, but the fact that they have this kind of more short-term impact on a target that's close to their heart, it even helps them move forward in their PhD.
Absolutely.
Because the PhD is such a long, it's such a delayed gratification exercise. So I thank you for bringing that up, and it is important to talk about it. Now I have a last question, but before this last question, I'd love you to just share, if people want to ask you some more questions or want to react to something that you said, I'd love you to share where people can find, and I already mentioned blackriverpm.com, but what's the best way to reach out to you, to find out about what you do, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So that website is a great spot because you find a lot of our industry specific stuff and our thought leadership stuff as it relates to blogs, podcasts. But there's a contact us or contact me form right on there. So you can just submit that and we'd find a time to get together and chat. There's also our email address, info@blackriverpm.com is on there. But if you're on LinkedIn, and if you're not on LinkedIn, and you want to get into industry, you need to get into LinkedIn. Yeah. And just look up Robert. And as you mentioned, the last name's Leon. It's spelled like Lion. Find me there. And I'm happy to chat. People are doing great things, but I'm also sensitive to what we necessarily don't know, right? Like there's services and opportunities around. There's needs to rebuild departments and colleges around these very specific student things to exit them into industry with broader opportunities. And I'm happy to talk about what those things look like and how I've done that in other schools also.
Amazing. Don't hesitate. LinkedIn is a great way to reach out to people and even alumni, like we said before. It's easy to find them and it's very low barrier to getting a yes from someone. Like I was saying in the beginning, very often when you come out of a PhD, especially, let's say, like me, cell biology or chemistry or, something very, or not too close to any industry domain, there's a barrier in culture, in language, terminology. There's also maybe a lack of self-awareness of what we've done that might represent something important for people who interview us. For example, leadership experiences like the ones you mentioned, which were super, I really, really like them. And based on your experience, I'd love you, for kind of the last words, to give your take on what are the needs today on the industry, on the employer side of things, let's say outside academia. What are the key things that these companies are looking for? Especially when we're talking about complex things where PhDs can fill those roles. Do you have a minute to kind of inspire people to believe that they fit in these spaces that are not academic?
Yeah. So I think if I could speak from the groups I work with and the groups I hear from, people are looking to hire regardless of expertise in industry. They're looking for people that are good team players. If you want to increase your success and expedite and improve the rate of your success, I'd work on emotional intelligence. That is one of the differentiators in terms of people getting through life and emotion, and whether it's a leadership role or just the person starting out in a new career. Emotional intelligence is a level of awareness about what's going on internally and how you regulate it and how you can observe emotions in the environment and how you regulate your own emotions relative to that. That's easy to get very, like, well, I'm not too emotional. Most of the people that tell me that are, and they don't realize kind of how they're putting other people off. So there's a level of interaction and aptitude that people are looking for, because there's a lot of people out there that can do a lot of the stuff we can do, right? Even though you said they're like, we might be a part of that 5%, but there's other people out there. And it's just the same thing as I came from a little bit of a sports background too. And one of my last papers actually looks at athletes. We have people that could score goals on the rink, right? But if they don't play well with their teammates, if there's conflict, those days have passed where we're just going to have the one star. Now we're looking at that team. We're looking at how well they play together, how they look out for each other, how they bring people up and are generous, right? So there's a variety of things that relate to that. If people want to read 2 books that will help them prepare, I'd say Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman. It's a classic. It's, I think, 1985. That hasn't changed much. And then another one I think is a great one is Adam Grant's Give and Take. And it talks about our disposition to help others versus take from others. And what it will do is it will improve our understanding of how the more community-oriented we are, the further we get in life. And sometimes we don't realize that because we think that we need to fight for things. And at a certain level, we do fight for things. We need to be competitive, but we also need to be kind. And that's what all my employees are looking for. They want people that are going to play well together. They're going to support each other. They're going to show up. They're going to have integrity, and they're going to bring people along with them.
Amazing. I think it's a great way to close this interview. And it might be surprising some of the listeners because of the way we go through life, academia, etc. We get to that first employment conversation thinking, I need to show the best of myself and I need to be that star player. And what you're saying is that's not the key. Team player is higher than star player. You can become a star player eventually. first you need to show you're a team player. And I think that's a super, super important message. And it's not out there clearly for everyone to know. So if you're surprised, re-listen to this last minute or so again and try to understand how it applies to you, because I think it's going to change the way you go through things for going forward.
Perfect.
Rob, thank you so much for this conversation. It was really, really inspiring. You brought really different ways of looking at things that I really appreciated. And I'm sure this is going to be of great value for the listeners.
Wonderful.
And even if it's just to change the way they think about industry, about employers out there, and about what they're expecting of them, because that's something that we ignore when we're coming out of academia. And that's why I have these conversations, to kind of draw the curtains on these things and let people be more relaxed and have a different and more chill journey to their first employment after graduate school. So thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for what you're doing, because you're doing a great service for people. Because I think back to, and I know students that are going through the process now, you get to that finish line, like you said, that delayed gratification. And then sometimes you don't know what's next because you haven't thought about that exit strategy, essentially. And what I like what you're doing is helping bring attention to that. Someone going into their final year of getting ready for their defense, or even before that, I'm starting to look at where I'm going to land after this. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And thank you for your appreciation. And it's funny because I'm reaching almost 6 years of this podcast, and someone was asking me, when are you going to stop? And I said, well, as long as there are stories to tell and there's unknowns to reveal, I'll be here telling these stories. So thank you for your kind words.
Keep it up.
Thank you for listening to this new episode of Season 6 of Beyond the Thesis with Papa PhD. Have a question about this interview? Want to leave a comment about the podcast? Have someone you want to recommend to be interviewed? Go to speakpipe.com/papaphd and leave me a voice note. Just hit the big record button and leave me an up to 90-second message. I listen to all my messages and I consider all of them for feature on future episodes. speakpipe.com/papaphd. Hope to hear from you soon.